Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Alan Herrera. As you know, or those of you who don't know, I am the editorial supervisor for the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in the United States. That is, of course, AFPC-USA. And what I love about this is that as part of this talk series, this is the Foreign Correspondent Talk Series 2025. I get the opportunity to talk with foreign correspondents about their lives, their careers, their experiences adapting to life and culture in the United States, current events, etc. But most of all, it's just a really great opportunity to just get to hear from really interesting people from all walks of life. And today I'm very pleased to share info about today's guest. I have Joseph Pelan, who is a multimedia journalist who's worked for the BBC and elsewhere. He's been a videographer, he's been an editor, and one of the things that makes this a very exciting conversation for yours truly is that he is a fellow film person and he did work for Talking Movies with the BBC. And as a big film buff and nerd, this is going to be very fun for me. So, hello, Joseph. Thank you for being here with me. I really appreciate it today, and I think that we'll just have a really fun conversation.
Looking forward to it, Alan. Yeah, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for inviting me to join you today.
Of course, of course. Just to start off, could you tell our audience just a little bit about you? Like, how did you get, for example, into film, into editing? How did you know that you wanted to turn this into some kind of career, and how did you fall into journalism?
Starting with, I was probably around 17 years of age. I set up my own small magazine in the north of Ireland and Belfast. With a group of friends, sat around the table together, some university friends, mostly in the English department at Queen's University, and we devised a plan to create our own independent magazine which I wrote for and edited and then subsequently produced and sold around the town in Belfast. It featured interviews with local musicians and artists and poets and had film reviews. And it was just bit of a melting pot of different sort of ideas, story ideas. And yeah, it was just an opportunity to sort of exercise our creative muscle and see if we could produce something. It was somewhat successful. We managed to have a pretty good print run. We did two issues, and then we turned it into an event night that people could then attend. And then that kind of gave me the bug. After that, I subsequently went to Berlin, where I did an internship for a magazine called Ex Berliner, and I lived over in Germany for about a year and got the opportunity to meet lots of different musicians and artists. One example was I got to interview Peter Sellers, who is a theater director who was making a adaptation of Othello with the Nobel Prize winning author Toni Morrison. The play was called Desdemona. And yeah, I got to to review an exhibition of Ai Weiwei. He was a Chinese artist on an exhibition of photography he did, cataloging his time in New York. And yeah, so I was around 20 years old when that happened, and then subsequently went to Dublin, where I did another internship for an individual who had set up RT Lyric, which is a national broadcaster in Ireland. And I worked with her production company, working as a production assistant initially and researcher for documentaries around the Paralympics and other stories.
Wow, so you've had a lot of variety, a lot of variety in your career, it sounds like. And I mean, could you just tell me what was it like, just diving into, topic to topic? How did you, I suppose, find your niche or like what really fascinated you? How did you find your own voice, so to speak, as you worked on all of these projects?
Well, I think initially it was just about trying to learn the craft of writing. I was really interested in writing. I'm an avid reader, and both of my parents are journalists themselves, so I would have grown up as a child sitting around the dining room table discussing the news events of the day. Yeah, and I suppose I was just interested to see if I could do it myself. And yeah, initially when I moved to Berlin, it was just about learning the craft, interviewing techniques, seeing if I could find stories, sitting down in front of the editor and pitching stories. I was told at a young age, always have a story up your sleeve at editorial meetings. Should one get knocked back, never be left empty-handed, so you can have a couple more to suggest. And that was sort of where I learned the trade a little bit initially in Berlin. Subsequently from that, I was always interested in film. So the opportunity came up to work within a production company. Helen Shaw was the managing director of that production company. She has a very good reputation in the Republic of Ireland of being a journalist in her own right, and then the managing director of a production company. So I saw the opportunity there to sort of kind of diversify my skills beyond writing, taking the skills I'd learned to produce radio and to produce television. So that's where the multimedia journalist title came about. And then from there, I just continued to develop it. I had the sort of the knowledge to write articles, to interview, but also to translate that into radio and television. I then subsequently went to go and study at university, an undergraduate degree in Media City in Salford, where I learned TV and radio production from a lot of current and ex-BBC producers. And then again, they helped me to develop my craft into shaping my own style of documentary making. And yeah, that's kind of where it all really originated from.
Well, I understand that now you are based in Brooklyn, so hello, it's from one New Yorker to another. Um, and I would love to know just about your experience working, here in the United States. And I know that you did work for Talking Movies with the BBC, which of course is fascinating to me. I did really enjoy the work that I looked up. I know that you shared a link with me. It was just really appealed to, my nerdy film buff side. So it'd be really good to hear more about that and how you got into it and what you learned about, what you learned from all of this. It's just a really cool opportunity. Hmm.
Sure. So, fast track after my undergraduate degree, after a number of years, I went to do a postgraduate degree in Queen's University in filmmaking. And as a consequence, there is a visa you can apply for, being an Irish citizen who studied in an Irish university, to go and work in the United States for a year. So after following my postgraduate degree, I took up that opportunity and traveled over to New York. Through a network of connections that I was able to develop, I was ended up being introduced to Tom Brooke, who was the longtime presenter of Talking Movies on the BBC. And yeah, I obviously had the background working for different newspapers and working with different production companies. Had a a postgraduate degree at that stage. And yeah, did an interview with Tom. He liked what I could do. I shot a little mock sort of interview with him, some vox pops on the street, and then he took me on to work with him for the year in New York, which was a fantastic opportunity. I had experience previously working for broadcast TV and radio, but it was really working with Tom. He showed me how to really craft these 4.5 minute topical pieces on events within the film industry week by week, and just sort of creating them almost like an assembly line in the most creative way possible. We would find the stories, we would interview the people. It was a job that took me all over New York to a lot of the film events that happen in the city. And yeah, it gave me a real grounding in how to produce short form content for broadcast television.
I find that fascinating. It's one of the really cool things about just making connections in places like New York City and in places like Washington, D.C., right? Um, so many people from so many different walks of life, and you never know who you're going to talk to and who's going to open a door, right? That's going to change the direction of your life, right? Like here you are, you lived in Germany, for example, right? But here we have, this Irish boy who suddenly finds himself on the opposite side of the pond, right? And here you are working for the BBC for someone who is highly esteemed, right? And I mean, have you ever, and I've asked this of other journalists as well, as you've, embarked on this journey, and of course, right, like we always develop, ideally, right, we always develop more confidence in our craft and in ourselves over time. But have you ever dealt with imposter syndrome, Joseph? Have you ever had just a difficult time adapting and wondering, oh, okay, do I even belong here? I ask this because, for journalists, it's so difficult, right? Just like getting ahead in media, right? It's a very difficult field. Budgets are tight. Layoffs are sadly, commonplace, all kinds of things. So how has it felt to sort of find your place, in the media sphere?
Yeah, in regards to the imposter syndrome, I would say it's something that I would probably consider it every day, in terms of, really, am I good at this or am I doing the right thing? But that's part of the process. It's, that's just part of the internal monologue that I think most people have. And hopefully you have a good support network around you, or you have a good environment in the place that you work, and people can give you critical feedback on your work, and you can take that on board and just realize that it's iterations. You improve as you go along, and you take each day as it comes, and you look at the previous piece of work that you might have made the week before. My strategy is just to identify at least one thing that I can improve, not the whole thing. Not if I've identified a number of issues with it, then just identify one and say to yourself at least, okay, well, the next week, that one thing won't be the issue next week. And then it's sort of methodical like that. Each week you improve a little bit better and you refine your craft as you go along. It's a process. And hopefully you enjoy the process and the craft you're involved in, and learning and not being very good at it can also be part of the fun of it, because you grow. I was very fortunate that I had Tom as a boss who could guide me in terms of how to craft these short form videos that we created each week. And he has years and years of experience within the BBC. So he has probably seen all the mistakes you could possibly imagine be made. And he was able to kind of guide me and show me, look, this is good. This needs improvement. And we had a good working relationship where we had that dialogue and we can improve week by week. And that was fantastic for me because it meant that I was able to be honest with myself, not too much of a harsh critic, and also learn. By the end of the year, I was able to edit the 30-minute episode for the BBC, and I felt very confident to find stories and to pitch these stories in the film. And yeah, I could see my work from when I very first started to where I finished up, and see how much I improved. And when you look at it back in retrospect, you can really see where you've grown. I think the way imposter syndrome works is day by day. Sometimes you don't really see the improvements that you're making, but if you give yourself a little bit of time and a little bit of compassion, you can look back in retrospect and see what you've actually managed to accomplish.
I like that. I mean, I think it's true. We have to give ourselves compassion and we have to give ourselves a lot more grace, especially when things are when again it's a difficult field to be in. It's not, it's not the easiest. And there's so much competition. How many people want to work for the BBC, for example, right? Or talking movies. I'm curious now. I mean, so you had the year with the BBC, right? Well, and you pitched stories and did a bunch of things, right? But what would you say was one of your favorites that you worked on? What was one moment perhaps that you put forward a pitch and they loved it and you thought, yes, this is what I'm going to do now, and you had a great time with it? Can you tell me about one?
Sure. I mean, probably very early on when I started, I just landed in New York. I had a lot of contacts in other countries, but nothing in America. It was my first time being in America when I arrived. So, being a journalist, having a slate of contacts you can rely upon sometimes to tell you what's going on or give you ideas for stories is very important. So, I kind of devised a strategy to help me with that problem. So I was told through a friend that there was these things called micro cinemas in New York, these sort of independent venues that platform independent cinema. And I thought that might be a really good avenue for not only documenting that sort of independent cinema landscape, but also getting to know some of the people that run those establishments. So I pitched that as an idea to Tom quite early on within Talking Movies. He liked it, and we ran with it. So that was a kind of a two birds, one stone strategy. I was able to pitch something, we created a show out of it, but through doing it, I was able to create a range of contacts for myself and also familiarize myself a little bit more with the cinema landscape within New York. And some of the contacts that I met from doing that original story on micro cinemas ended up able to furnish me with contacts or future ideas for following episodes.
That's how it works. It's all about connection and speaking to the right people. And I think that New York is just a really wonderful place for that. I mean, aside from all of that and just the great strides that you've made professionally, you mentioned how, okay, you landed in New York. It was your first time, being here in the United States. What has it been like adapting to life and culture here? Navigating you have to navigate all the professional stuff, right? But having to deal with culture shock, for example, in some cases, right? That can be very difficult. I speak to so many different journalists, right, from all different walks of life. They hail from you name it. I've interviewed them, probably not from Antarctica or something like that, but I mean, I hear very fascinating stories about just like the lengths that they've had to go to just find somewhere that they belong, and that can be very difficult when you're also trying to balance your professional obligations. So could you just tell me a little bit more about, what it's been like for you as you've moved ahead?
Of course, yeah. In terms of acclimatizing, I feel, I'm a massive movie buff, so I've watched a lot of cinema relating to New York specifically, and in a larger sense, America. So when I got here, I had that sort of familiarity, or it felt familiar automatically. But my lived experience of it different from my expectations from watching films, where yeah, just I don't know how to explain it really. When you walk down the street when you first get here, it feels like a movie set because you've seen it documented in so many movies. But then you realize, oh, this is just a place like any other place, and there's bodegas and there's shops and there's people. And it takes a little bit of time, but I think just being here acclimatizes you to the place. I think, for example, some assumptions that I had about New York, for example, that were sort of challenged was that this place was really brusque and really rude, and you had to be really on it, or else you'd be in trouble. I think certain elements of that true, especially professionally. It's quite a competitive place to work, but my experience of it was people were very, very friendly. People were maybe brusque, but very, very friendly. If you stopped when I first got here, didn't know the directions to somewhere, they would tell you where that place is. And generally, I found a really good sense of almost community from New Yorkers, every New Yorker that I've met, just randomly. And I've met some really good friends here. I've met my girlfriend here. And yeah, I just feel the familiarization just happens through a process of being here. It does challenge some assumptions, as I said, from meeting people. They're very, very friendly, which I hadn't envisioned. I had envisioned a very cold, competitive kind of place. I have to be really weary of, I was told, for example, when I got onto the subways, don't make eye contact with anybody because it's maybe slightly dangerous. And those things can be true. But on the whole of it, I found it to be a very friendly place, and very open, and people are great here. Maybe it's just been my experience of it. I don't know if
Well,
that answers your question, but
no, I mean, I think it does. And I mean, look, New York is, what is it? It's the melting pot of the country, right? Like everybody, everybody's in New York, right? So I mean, it's true, right? The whole like, oh, if you can make it in New York, you can do it anywhere. And it's like, well, yeah, when you have to balance, so you're dealing with so many people, right? From so many different places, so many different, personalities. It's a lot, but as somebody born and raised here, in New York City, I really like what you said, not saying this as a, oh, yes, that is exactly what New York is. But in my experience, yes, like we can be brusque, but I find that New Yorkers may not exactly be nice people, but they're very kind people. That's what it is. Just don't waste our time, like walk as if you have someplace to be. Like that's the main thing. And then I find that I can't get that out of my system no matter where I am. Like I'll just be speed running everywhere I go, whether I'm in a, I'm not actually in a rush or anything, but it's just the way it is. Um, and I will say for any foreign correspondents, for any journalists who are listening, it is true that the film scene in New York is just, it's a die for. As somebody who really loves going to IFC and loves going to Film Forum or Nighthawk Cinema and the lovely membership there, or to Metrograph, another one with another really good membership scheme. The indie scene, the indie and art house movie scene in Brooklyn is really excellent, as is in Queens. There's the Kew Gardens Cinema in Kew Gardens in Queens. If you've been to that one, it is phenomenal. I do remember, I will share this for fellow journalists. Years ago, I had eye surgery done. I had LASIK, right? So I wore glasses for more than 20 years. And suddenly I was seeing in high definition and it was fascinating. People really take their eyesight for granted. And the first thing I did was go to the Kew Gardens Cinema. The Impossible with Naomi Watts and Ewan McGregor was playing. And I went to the movie, and for the first time in my entire life, I sat all the way in the back. And it was fabulous. I've never forgotten it. It was, for me, it felt like watching a movie like for the first time, like really watching it for the first time without any obstruction, without needing to be worried about, oh, am I comfortable? Can I actually see? Are my glasses good? Right? Like all these other things. And it really meant a lot to me as a regular film goer and as somebody who has a gigantic collection of, of DVDs. And I suppose one could say I probably could have been or should have been more of an entertainment journalist. But in any case, I'm curious. Joseph, can you tell me, since you mentioned you like a lot of movies, tell me about one or two of your favorite films, and perhaps also one about New York, or even here's an idea, or even a film about journalism, if you've seen any that come to mind.
Sure, yeah. I mean, wow, there's so many. Well,
It's
okay,
a
so
hard
I can give you
question.
this quick I can give you this quick anecdote. When I first moved to New York, I saw the films that were being projected live in Dumbo. And it's a really lovely forum. People go and sit in the grass and watch this film on a projector. And it was a great introduction to the city because I think it was Pulp Fiction that was playing. It was a favorite
Mm.
film of mine. And just with the background of New York with helicopters flying overhead, sitting here in the grass in Dumbo, it's a beautiful skyline that's kind of surrounding you, and everybody kind of sitting around here in the grass, communing over the love of cinema, watching this film. That was a great experience to see it in that setting. Um, a film specifically about journalism. I don't know if one comes to mind right now. I mean, I love the films of Peter Watkins. If you've seen any of his films, they're very interesting. They sort of challenge the usual confines of cinema. They're quite long, or the topics that they're about are quite challenging. So I think he's quite an interesting filmmaker, and he's done them sort of in the guise of journalists. So one of his most earliest films was the Battle of Culloden. And I think the premise of the film, they send this sort of documentary team back to Culloden as if they were there in real time. So you kind of have this 1980s film crew running around interviewing people in the middle of the battle. And that's kind of his trope. That's as a filmmaker, that's what he does. I would strongly recommend his sort of work.
That is, it's very interesting because I find that documentary filmmaking is just anybody who wants to be a journalist should watch, more documentaries, as many as possible. There are brilliant filmmakers with journalistic chops who are doing excellent, excellent work. And in terms of movies about journalism, I mean, classics like, everybody knows All the President's Men, for example, or something even like about 10 years ago, the movie Spotlight, won one best picture. And I found that one very moving because it's very simple. It's a very quietly told story, and it's a story predominantly about, if you've seen it, I'm not sure if you have. You have,
Michael
yes.
Keating, Michael Keaton
Yes.
movie, yeah. I bet is it the Washington Post?
Say what? I'm sorry.
Was it the Washington Post? Was it with
It
Spotlight? Was
was
it
the Boston Globe, the Boston Globe.
Boston Globe? That's right. Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah, about the scandal in regards to the church. Yeah.
In regards to the church, yes. And what's really great about that one is that, again, it's very quietly told and it just focuses on the merits of investigative work. It's just about journalists doing their job. There's nothing bombastic necessarily. People watch it. And I mean, right, because we expect it. We expect to see a movie where it's like, oh, okay, here we go. There's going to be this massive revelation or something. And it's like, no, there is one, but it's very methodical. They're just doing their jobs without much fanfare, right? And that is, I suppose, what it can be like when you're just a journalist going about your day, especially when you're challenging, in this case, right? Like in the case of that film, the people in that film, great journalists who did wonderful work. You're going up against the halls of power, the levers of power. And it can be a very thankless job. And we here at the association, right? We champion all journalists, whether they're in, politics journalism or not. I mean, you yourself, right? Like yours is more entertainment focused, and I say that we need more of you, right, on this program. I definitely think so. But in any case, it's just it's so important to champion all kinds of journalism, especially in a time when many people are placing less emphasis on the humanities, right? And I find that a humanities education, certainly reading, right, is so important. But filmmaking, television, right, we learn so much about ourselves, right, and about the world around us just by engaging with so much beautiful art that's been produced. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the importance of journalism as a trade, or sorry, if you could just summarize the question, how did you mean
Sort
so?
of, well, yeah, like journalism as a trade, but also just engaging with, with art in all of its forms and how it can really challenge your perception of the world. And I think that being challenged that way does create good, good thinkers and observers and, in essence, good journalists.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's journalism regarded as the fifth estate, it's important. There's a judiciary and this, and but there is journalism, and it serves this purpose. It allows people to sort of examine what's happening in the world. I think it's an interesting time to be a journalist. I think the environment has changed, potentially has compared to what it was in the 80s, the 90s. Legacy media, obviously, with the advent of the internet, is not as powerful as it was once. And then that, as a consequence, changes the trade. It changed to some extent in terms of how it's distributed, who watches it, and obviously its relevance. But I think it's no less as relevant as it was then. It's really important for people just to get a different perspective on what they're presented, be it a film, be it a current event that's happening, to have an individual there whose job it is to present an observation of it, potentially an editorial, to give an analysis of it, for you to be able to compare that analysis to another person within the trade's analysis, and then create your own opinion about that. I think it still serves a very vital function.
Well, in regard to that function, I would like to just pivot this conversation to a moment. I know that you and I had a conversation before about cognitive film theory, and I know that you are working on a PhD, right, at the moment. And I would certainly love to hear just a little bit more about this since we're on the topic, right, of engaging with art, right, and the way that like just different people approach it and the way it's processed. I think that our audience of correspondents would just love to hear a little bit about this since it gives us more of an idea of what makes you tick.
Sure. So I studied a postgraduate in film studies. I love the films of Robert Bresson. I watched all of his films, a French filmmaker. One of his famous films is called Pickpocket.
That's
And sorry.
that's a great one, really good one. Hmm.
And so I came across a film theorist, who I believe sadly passed away late last year, called David Bordwell, who wrote a book called Narration in the Fiction Film. And I read this book during my postgraduate while watching a lot of the films of Bresson. And he covers a lot of his films. Um, my PhD proposal that I'm working on at the moment relates a lot to David Bordwell's arguments in terms of how do people engage with art, not in the sense of what do you critically think about it, but how does it actually work? Well, what are the functions involved when you are presented with a piece of work, and how does it stimulate you or engage you scientifically? How does that operate? When you watch Gravity with Sandra Bullock, how is it that you feel like you're almost floating as well? When you see a scene of vertigo in a Hitchcock film, what is it that that effect actually does to you? And so I was really interested in, as a filmmaker and a journalist, looking to merge a sort of an understanding of the craft with stories that I wanted to cover. So at the moment, I'm working on a PhD proposal around these sorts of ideas. It's relating to the theme, a bit of a fancy word, cross-modal sensory perception, and how that works. And it's a study of that and how it might be applied to filmmaking.
I think that that is a fascinating note to end on, and I hope that this is published and shared with our fellow journalists who would stand to learn a little, a little something about this. And I mean, and I do think that all foreign correspondents, especially since so many of them, in general, English might not be their first language, and they may have, fewer resources available to them than their native-born counterparts. I find that one of the recommendations I provide foreign journalists is to just engage with as much art as you can. Watch movies, watch television, engage with stories, and you learn a little bit more about yourself and the world around you. And I think that just getting to delve into the topic that you're delving into right now, I think that we could benefit a lot from that. It'll certainly challenge the way that I look at the films that I watch. So, um, thank you so much, Joe. I think that this has been a very fun and insightful conversation. It's a different tone, right, from prior conversations that I've had, which have been similarly fun, except we're often talking about the state of the country at the moment. So I think that this is a nice palate cleanser for our audience of foreign correspondents. And do you have any final thoughts to share? I'm very happy that you've just been here with me today.
I just want to thank you for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, Alan. I think it's a great series that you're producing to talk to journalists and just to give an insight in terms of what they do. I presume for some people outside of the trade, it might be a little bit opaque sometimes, and it's really not as scary or unknown as some people might think. So it's great what you're doing. I think speaking with people in terms of a final comment, I would say just keep watching films and keep reading the news. It provides a very important vital function. And yeah, long may it continue.